Yo, lords and ladies of the realm, it's your boy, he the Prince, back at ya. Thanks for joining me. I'm gonna try to keep it short. We'll see how short it is. I wanted to talk about orbs today and my experiences with them. Orbs, wisps. Let's see, what do they call them? Willow wisps. They probably got some other names too, but I want to share my experiences with them. First off, I want to touch on something. I was going through, I got a bunch of these little books, and I'm notorious for writing in 4 pages of them and then leaving them and stopping and all that. But I was going through and I need to consolidate them all. But I came across an interesting thing that I'd kind of forgotten about, but it had to do with shooting stars. And this plays into the orb thing. So I wanted to touch on it real quick. Shooting stars. When you think of shooting stars, anybody that's ever seen one, they just go pew and kind of do one of those deals. But in theory, isn't that kind of weird? Because they're out in space and whatever. And if it were to explode, wouldn't it look more like a firework than per se a Roman candle, like it's being projected from something, which is another thing to touch on. I guess we'll get into it. So we've all seen shooting stars and stuff, and they're just shooting stars as far as we know or think or whatever, right? I was at a point in my life where I needed guidance, and I needed it from spirit, God, whatever. And I went out one night. It was real late, because definitely in my high school years and stuff, I was definitely looking for something more, and it took me on a bunch of different journeys and paths, but there was also an aspect that I was just tormented. And I have a video on shadow beings and stuff, and that used to be prevalent in my life at one point. But there was a point where I just went out. I went outside. It was probably 12, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I got down on my knees and just said, God, whoever's out there, spirit, I need help. Help me. And at that very moment, 3 shooting stars, just one after another, sailed perfectly that I could see. And I felt relief. And I ended up meeting a person a few days after that was a big part of my journey, which I'll do a video on her at some point. She was a very interesting character, and I don't know if she was good. I don't know if she was evil. I don't know if she was neutral, but it was definitely something that I needed to go through in my life. And that's an interesting story in itself. But as far as the orbs and the shooting stars and all that, which I do want to touch on this again real quick, that with the shooting stars, I've always been kind of like a seeker of knowledge, seeker of spiritual things. And I remember reading the Testament of Solomon. And in there, if you're familiar with it, God gives him a ring that gives him power over demons. And then he brings them all in and says, what afflicts you? What do you do to people? All this different stuff. And at one point, I remember, I believe, and I may be mixing it up, but there was a demon that was giggling about some kid, the kid that had brought him. And in it, he asked what he was laughing about, and he was saying, well, this old man was looking for gold. He was sitting on a rock that there was gold under it, this and that, and it was going through and was essentially alluding to or saying, demons or these entities know more than we do, but they're not omniscient. Is that the right word? Omniscient? They're not all knowing, but they converse and talk with each other. And in there, it said, we fly at night and we go from place to place and we're in the air and we listen to conversations. We go up to heaven, we listen to things. We come down here, we listen to people's conversations, their problems, their gossip, their all that kind of stuff. And that's how they know so much, is they communicate with each other, flying around the world, doing all this and that and the other, right? Is what they say in there. But he also says at one point, men look in the night sky and see what they call shooting stars. And he was like, they're not shooting, they're not stars. That's us. That's us flying around. And after a while, we get tired and we fall to the earth. Something akin to that, which I always thought was interesting, because I noticed that, or I found that after the 3 shooting stars thing, which again brought me to a person that was, I don't even know if they were a person, to be quite honest. I do believe so, but they were different. They were peculiar for sure. So in that, that brings me back to the shooting stars, where if you're thinking about it scientifically, I'm pretty sure, as far as I remember, they say that a shooting star is a star collapsing in on itself and blowing up or whatever. Doesn't it seem odd that they would shoot them like that? It should just look like fireworks, right? I mean, maybe there's some, in theory, if stars have a pole and it caves in on one side of itself, I mean, I guess it could shoot out like that. I'm not real sure. But I thought it was an interesting footnote about the Testament of Solomon and his dealings with all these, as I believe the Greek would see, daemons or whatever, which is just means spiritual beings, I guess. Some are good, some are bad. That's where the word demon comes from, as far as I believe. But so after that experience, years went by and stuff, and every now and again, for those of us who talk to ourselves or talk to spirit or talk to God or whatever, there would be times at night where I'd be thinking stuff or having inner conversations, and then I would see one, and it was almost like an answer or a yes or a no in whatever it is that you were thinking or contemplating or whatever. And I'll touch on it real quick because I want to do a separate video on that also, where things that either I or spirit has manifested, that you've thought of, you've wanted, and then kind of let go. And one of those things was a job that a family member of mine knew a car dealership. They're friends with a car dealership, and the whole family of that's what this family does, is they sell cars. And I was working a job that I was unhappy at, and I was by myself in the car one day, drove by the place, and I thought to myself, well, it'd be cool to like do security there or something, and you know, that seems like it would be a cool job or whatever. I didn't tell anybody. It was literally just one of those. I just happened to drive by the place. I had worked there washing cars when I was about 16, 17. And at this point in my life, I was probably 25 or so. And I remember driving by and thinking that, and I didn't tell a soul. It was just me in the car, wasn't on the phone, thought it in my head. And would you know, maybe a week later, a few days later, a week, maybe two, I get a call from this family member and they're like, hey, they've been having a lot of problems with theft and tires getting stolen, rims getting stolen, cars are getting stolen. They asked me, do you want to do the security? And this person's retired and they didn't want to mess with it. And they thought of me and were like, hey, would you want to do it? And I was like, well, do what? Because somebody had came in. There was a big truck in their shop, in the body shop, I believe. And somebody broke in, and they have two big garage double bay door things. Somebody broke in, got in that truck, and just drove it through both garage doors. And obviously that was a big mess. They never found the truck. And again, with all the other stolen things and whatever, car dealerships are one of them places that kind of regularly get hit a few times throughout the year. It seems like a revolving thing. And maybe it's just because I had ties with them that, we would hear about it or whatever, but it seemed to be pretty prevalent constantly. So I was like, yeah, I'll do that, which again was a crazy thing to manifestation or whatever you want to call it, because I literally told no one. And since then, or afterwards, I had told my wife and I had told this person, and I've told a couple people since, if it happens to come up in a weird conversation or whatever, but I just thought that was very interesting. But so I would work nights, and I would work 10 and 12-hour shifts, and there was a few other guys that ended up doing it as well, but they had what they called overflow lots. So they would pay other businesses that had a big parking lot to let them keep their cars on their lot, essentially indefinitely. They would just mark off a spot. They would put a bunch of cars there, and then they're essentially in just not public parking lots, but privately owned parking lots or whatever, that were just kind of open, no fences, stuff like that. So I would go from lot to lot to lot and work all night, which actually gave me a lot of time to kind of listen to podcasts and different things. And I was interested in occult things and UFOs and other worldly things and mystical stuff and all that kind of stuff. So part of me thinks that that's why it was like me going to school, because for the most part, these nights were fairly uneventful. I stopped a couple people from stealing things at certain points or whatever, but for the most part, after a while, people know that you're around, so they just they would go to other car lots and mess around as opposed to deal with the one that I worked for. Now in this, there got to be where I would see these shooting stars multiple times a week in the middle of the night, multiple times a week. And again, you're having conversations with yourself, or you're listening to a podcast and you're thinking something, and then you see one and you're like, okay, whatever. Eventually they were so prevalent, and it started out as the shooting stars, but then would do other weird things. Like I had seen one at one point that kind of shot, and it was more fuzzy looking even, but it had the tail, and it went, and the tail's there the whole time. and then it stopped right here. The tail then went, and then it was just a ball of like white light, white, maybe a hint of blue, and it would sit there. And then if you looked real close, it looked like it was kind of wobbling, and then it would kind of like pulse, and then just fade away. And you were like, whoa, what was that? That's wild looking. And so I had that happen a couple times. And after a while, it seemed like they had some sort of a sentience or a consciousness, or they definitely seemed conscious. And there was one time also that there was a family member that was kind of going through a rough patch in their marriage, and they had come up to talk to me during the night, and it got so wild that I was actually really aggravated about what had happened, because we're having this conversation in this parking lot at like 1 o'clock, whatever time it was. And one of these shooting stars, I'm facing the person. They can't see it. It's over their head. And it was just a little, but it wasn't far up in the sky. It was a shooting star that was 50 feet over their head. And it was one of those that, again, with the conversation at hand, and I know that they didn't see it because it was just barely behind them and over their head. I just wanted to go. And I didn't say a word. I didn't make a stink about it. I didn't do nothing. Because again, you're in, a fairly intense conversation, and then this happens. And it was so prevalent to me at the time that what do you do? Go, oh, there was a shooting star over your head, but it was close, and it was this and that and the other. And then they go, okay, you weirdo. And then what, you know what I mean? Where does it go from there? So I never said anything. It seemed kind of pointless or whatever. But after a while, especially with all the UFO phenomenon type stuff or whatever, I have never personally seen what you would call a physical hard UFO. I've seen a UFO in the sense of strange lights, strange things, but never anything that you would go, that looks like a flying piece of metal. Never have I seen anything like that. Everything is always lights, and they seem to kind of swim, which is another funny thing when they talk about like the firmament and the waters below and the waters above, because they almost are fish-like at some point where they kind of swim in the air. And I had noticed that at one point and thought it was just odd, or it was a little check mark in my mind. But these things got so prevalent that I would just be like, what do you want? Like, I see you, but like, what is it that you want? What are we doing here? And I remember being in my truck, and you get that feeling that someone's looking at you. And so you look and there's a person there or whatever. Well, I had that exact same phenomena or experience, except it was up in the sky. And I looked over, and it was a light. And I was like, oh, that's just a star or a bright star. And then I noticed it was doing the swimming thing. And, at this point, when something like this happens over and over and over again, You want answers to your questions. You just want to know. It felt like you're just being messed with or something at some point. And so I looked at the thing, and I don't recall if I said it out loud or if it was just in my head that I said it. But there is, like I said, seemed to be some sort of a consciousness or a way to communicate with these things. And I said, what do you want? Dance. Dance, you mother lover. Dance. Do something. What are you doing? Come down here, poker, something. What is it? Prove to me that this is even like, and the second that I was thinking, dance, do something. What are we doing here? That little light went boop and turned into 2 lights. And I was like, okay. And I mean, it was the second that I thought it. And I've already been, you can tell that it's looking at you or whatever, because it's no different than standing in a line and someone's staring at you and you turn around and they either go whoop or they look at you and whatever. You can tell there's that connection coming from it. The second I kind of called it out or said dance, that thing bloop into two balls. And at this point, it was so far away up in the sky, they looked like stars. And it was swimming along, pops into 2, and they both kind of are doing this thing. And then one sits still, and then the other one again like phases out, and it keeps kind of swimming and then just phases out. And then the other one sat there for a second, and then it almost had the feeling of like that. What do you think of that? And then it kind of quote unquote swam off a little bit and then just blinked out or dissipated or whatever. And, I've heard other people's accounts, and I understand, because you get to a point where you're like, what does this mean? Like, what are we doing here? Is it something that I'm supposed to do? Do you need something? Like, what are we doing here? And, they would just pop up, and it got to be a point where I would be very, what's the word for it? I don't want to say gleeful, but I went to work and would look forward to seeing them. And then it got to a point where it was just like, oh, okay. Head nod. Cool. I see you. Yep. I had that thought. Okay. Is that a yes? Because I used to say stuff in my head, thinking stuff, and then go, okay, like a yes. And then if it's like, boom, I'm like, okay, I guess that was a yes. And so it just went on like that for a while until one night, part of my job was, like I said, there was 3 different lots to go walk around or drive, and one dealership. For a little bit of a time, there was 2 dealerships to kind of go pay attention to or check on. But after a while, there was just one dealership and then 3 lots. So I used to go and walk these lots every hour, every few hours, and they were maybe a mile and a half at the most. And then there was a couple that were like a quarter mile or a half a mile away. So they're all in the general same area. And I would go and park my car. And it was one night I was out at the dealership, and, they have everything fenced off, and I'm checking doors. And that was also another thing. Some of the dealer or salesmen, they would leave keys in the cars and all that. So I'd go around and check cars and collect keys. And if they left dealer license plates around, I'd snag them up. And I had a place that I put all them. So, because I mean, some of these people just left, and it got to be a problem actually at one point where I was getting paid to get license plates and keys extra from my hourly pay because it was such a problem that people were leaving their license plates that have magnets on them and all that kind of stuff, and keys to the car, like in the ignition or in the cup holder or whatever. It got to be a problem sometimes. So I would go around checking all this stuff. And one night I was walking the back lot and I got that feeling again. Something's looking at you. And I looked up and I was like, dang, that's a bright star. And then noticed it was doing and it was just this big blue ball, blue and white, a big blue and white orb. And it was kind of doing this like weird swaying back and forth motion. And I finally realized it was coming down. And I finally realized, and look, I mean, this thing got that big. It was soccer ball, baseball size. Big. Coming down out of the sky. And I started getting the feeling, it was like the feeling of it wanted to touch me or like come inside of me or do something weird. And I instantly said, F no, gave it the old one finger salute and was like, ain't happening. No way, no how. And briskly walked back to my car. And that was in the moment, super terrifying. Because I've heard these stories afterwards now about like Skinwalker Ranch and those kind of places are, different. Because this kind of stuff happens to you in your life. You want answers. You go looking for answers. Okay. Or at least someone like me does. Maybe not everybody. Some people are like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to know. I don't care. Whatever. Not me. I'm like, what's up? What's really good with this? And after all the other experiences, when I had thought like, well, come down, aggravated, come down here. What's up? What's going on? When it actually happens, it's like, no, never mind. I'm good. And this thing came down, and I mean, it was pretty terrifying because it wasn't, and that's why I mentioned the Skinwalker Ranch and that kind of a thing, where you hear these people's stories and they're like kind of in awe, which it's definitely awe-inspiring. And then when it gets close like that, and I mean, it's hard to tell how far away something is when you're just looking at the sky and there's no other frame of reference. But I mean, I want to say this thing was probably 50 to 75 feet above my head. Maybe even close. It was probably 50, something like that. It was close. And I actually just heard another story, and I wish I could remember the gentleman's name. Something of Truth. He does kind of like a Gnostic channel, and Visions of Truth or Truth Untold. Maybe that's what it is. Go check him out if that was right. But he was talking about orbs, and he did a video on it, and really it was more he's talking about ball lightning and different stuff, but then sometimes they seem to be conscious and all this different stuff. And there was a story in there where these people see a blue orb, everybody's freaked out. They feel terror and fear and all this stuff. And then one guy has got the balls and he goes to touch it, and the thing like arcs, or it essentially electrocutes him. And like he almost died and this and that and the other. And there's always been a part of me that's like, should I have touched that thing? And I'm one that always follows my intuition. I follow my gut. And I mean, all of the flags were going off. And was it just because it's some crazy experience or phenomenon that you've never been that close to? Or I wonder if it was, I mean, it felt dangerous. And it felt like I said, I got the feeling of, I want to touch you. Or I was afraid it was going to like go like, I touch it and then it just goes boop and like sucks into me or something. That's like the vibe that I got. And like I said, I gave that bad boy the bird and was like, F you, ain't no way, no how. And I got out of there. Now, I have since seen shooting stars. I've never had another experience like that. I've heard stories of people. And see, that's the thing in like a lot of fairy tales and folk tales, they call them, let's see, what was it called? Will the Wisp. Will o' the Wisp. And that's apparently a story about a man who was so evil, it's said that the devil liked how evil he was and gave him a piece of charcoal to light at night to trick travelers or people in the night. And it's kind of said that like it's dark, and if you follow these things, like people fall off cliffs and like bad stuff happens, or they go disappearing and missing and this and that and the other. There's a whole folklore about wisps, and a lot of them seem to be orange or blue. And actually and I think I touched on it on another video. There's a movie called Brave. It's a kids movie, and there's a scene in there, which I haven't seen the entire movie, but there's a scene in there where this little girl sees these little blue, they almost look like little blue or like flames or orbs or whatever it is, and they start popping up and they go doot 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 doot, and it's a little trail for her to follow. And when she gets close, the one will go away, and then the next. I don't know even where. I've seen the clip of it. My wife and kids have seen the movie. I've never seen the whole movie. So I don't know. Sometimes Disney movies like to take terrifying stories and kind of swap them around. So in that story, do those wisps do something bad to her or take her to a weird place or a bad place? I don't really know. I haven't seen it. But they are definitely leading her somewhere. And I think her horse was super, her horse threw her off at like a Stonehenge type structure and essentially stopped, threw her into it. And if I am correct, I think she's like, what the heck's the matter with you, horsey? And then the horse doesn't want to step into the circle. And then she sees the wisps and starts following them. And the horse is like, wants nothing to do with it. So that's kind of my experience. And I still to this day it always piques I give it an eyebrow when I hear people talking about orbs and stuff, because that's one of them ones where it's like, I like to hear the stories because I want to know what they are, what they do, where they come from. They definitely have a consciousness of some sort. And what are they doing? What's their purpose? Why aren't they kind of known or prevalent to everyone? Which I've lived kind of for lack of a better term, weird or mystical ish type. I've had some weird stuff happen in my life. And when stuff like that happens, me at least, I want to know why, what's the deal, what is this? And even again, touching back on the first part with the three shooting stars, that woman that I ended up meeting after that encounter, which I will say, I was so tormented at that point in my life when I had went out and got on my knees and prayed in the middle of the night and saw those shooting stars. It was an instant relief. It was an instant. It was like the weight of the world was on you, and then you could finally like breathe. And I finally slept good that night, and I mean it was wonderful. And then again, I'm not going to get into the situations with her in this video, but I definitely needed that experience, the experiences I had with her in my life, I think, to move forward and to gain more knowledge and different stuff. But that was a wild ride in itself. And it's weird because life can be so ordinary and mundane and just plain sometimes. And then other times stuff like this happens and you're like, what is going on? Okay. Like, what is the deal? So that's my personal experience with the orbs. If you got an experience, leave it down in the comments. I want to know. Have you ever touched one? Can you feel that it has some sort of a sentience or some sort of a consciousness? Because the ones that I dealt with definitely do. And at first they would do that weird playing stuff. Like, it's so weird to like see a ball that looks like a star and see it go like big or light, not even necessarily big. They would light up real bright and the light would shoot just a little more. So it did look like they were getting bigger, but it almost was just getting brighter. And then it would sit there and sometimes they would swim off and then kind of fade out. Sometimes it would just sit there still. Sometimes they would swim around. I mean, it did all sorts of weird stuff. The weirdest definitely was it breaking into two, and then the one swimming off, and then the other one doing the same after a minute. And the creepiest was definitely a basketball, soccer ball size blue quote unquote hat. Like, I couldn't necessarily see through it, but you could tell it's like, this is not a hard object thing, whatever. And it was like real white in the center and then kind of blue around it. And I mean, and people want to say like ball lightning and that kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm obviously clearly am no physicist or scientist or anything like that. But I've seen some videos of ball lightning and different things. And if ball lightning is conscious and can move around and half communicate or definitely do some weird telepathic thing. Maybe it was ball lightning then, I guess. Who knows? But this was like a sentient being, had consciousness for sure. Just for sure. So, anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. It's getting a lengthy video. We're right at 40 minutes. If you have an experience with this, I would love to know. Because people like me, these are stories and accounts that I've had and dealt with from my teenage years to some of my adult years. And it's stuff that you go, I know damn well that this happened. I also know damn well that if you talk about it with a lot or a majority of people, you get the and there's experiences that I've had that if another person told me, my reaction would want to be the same. It would want to be that, okay, all right, sure it was, sure it did, because it sounds so fantastic. But at the end of the day, it's taken me a long time to try to get out and make videos like this and whatever, because obviously the strange is being turned up in our world, and people talk a bunch of wild different stuff. So it's getting a little weirder, and maybe it's just now time for me to be able to speak about some of it or whatever. But it's been a weird ride at times. So let me know your experience. I'm going to end it here. It's your boy, E the Prince. I appreciate all of you that came and spend a little time in the realm with me, lords and ladies. And remember, Christy Toby. All right. I'll holler at you.